Today's market panel, Dion Rabouin, Axios Markets reporter, Scott Martin, Kingsview Asset Management Chief Investment Officer. He's also a Fox News contributor. Dion, looking at the market here, we settled up now about 96 points. It had been about 101 at the close there. Doesn't seem like investors are terribly worried about what's going on in Washington right now. What's your take?
Yeah, and you know what? They didn't seem too terribly concerned initially. We did get some kind of a sell-off, but it wasn't a big 2-3% sell-off like you'd see in, times like a constitutional crisis, which is what some folks say we're looking at here. I think really the market doesn't see this as a realistic chance of President Trump going anywhere. They think that this could slow down his agenda of perhaps more tax cuts, more deregulation,
right,
things the market did like, but they don't think it's going to completely derail it. And I think the chances of him actually being put out of the White House are very low because, as we know, the Senate made up of majority Republicans. Most of them are probably going to have the president's back here.
Scott, I mean, for our audience, the question is, what impact does it have on the economy and the markets? And one thing is, we're looking ahead to getting tomorrow ISM manufacturing report. You want to know, does this slow down confidence? Does it slow down execution? What are your thoughts?
It probably does, Melissa, and that was already going on before we had the impeachment talk because of the China tariff war. So, yeah, I mean, I think Dion's right. It probably doesn't portend an outright removal, say, of Trump as far as the developments we've had, but it doesn't help either. I mean, we've got USMCA that's still not on the floor. Infrastructure spending is out there. Tax cuts were mentioned. I mean, there's a lot of other things that this market, I believe, was counting on over, say, the early summer that might not happen, might not be in the balance. So, to me, even if they go forward with this impeachment process, albeit slowly, it still slows down those other agendas, and that keeps the market from breaking to all-time highs, in my opinion.
Keep an eye on USMCA for sure. We got to watch USMCA. Yeah. That's a big one.
And obviously China trade, which we always talk about, and they're bracing for a showdown with China facing uncertainty over trade and also the escalating tensions we've seen in Hong Kong. All this on the eve of its 70th anniversary. Let's get to Edward Lawrence in Washington for the latest. Edward.
Yeah, Connell, those celebrations have already started in China, as it is tomorrow there. The administration pushing back on a plan, talking about limiting Chinese companies from registering on the U.S. stock exchanges. A spokeswoman for the Treasury Department saying that the U.S. is not blocking Chinese companies from listing shares at this time, adding, "We welcome investment in the United States." Still, other advisors say that today there is an issue with transparency among Chinese companies. Still, this is in the discussion phase. It has not gone to the president. Now, former Sun Microsystems co-founder Scott McNealy says, regardless, now is the time to take on China and level the trade playing field for the longevity of U.S. companies.
China is no longer just a little third world, developing nation. They are, I think, the second largest GDP in the world. Very, very powerful, very strong. And there's no question that their intellectual property actions are very detrimental to us. There's no question that their tariffs are higher than the tariffs we have on them.
And Sun Microsystems built servers and processors. It was bought by Oracle in 2010. Now, going into the trade talks between the heads of the trade teams next week, the Chinese are using muted language about all of this, saying, quote, "We hope the U.S. will work with China to continuously deepen our trade and economic and financial cooperation." The Chinese focused today on their big celebration for the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic. Still, China dealing with scenes like this in Hong Kong. Protesters turned violent over the weekend. Reuters is now reporting the Chinese doubled the number of troops in Hong Kong to 12,000. Protesters worried that their democratic rights will be stripped. Others think the protesters are out of line.
We support all policies and reforms and openings by the government. Now some people in Hong Kong are causing trouble, and as Chinese citizens, we are very angry. We must carry on the patriotic spirit.
And China is well into its celebration. Their markets are now closed for the week to mark the 70th anniversary. Connell?
Yeah, closed for the week. All right, Edward Lawrence there in Washington. Dion, Scott, let's talk about this a little bit. As Edward points out, it's already October 1st, Scott. We've been looking forward to this date for a long time. A lot of people had it circled on their calendars what would happen either in Hong Kong or mainland China. In terms of Hong Kong, those are some more disturbing pictures, right? Over the weekend, things got violent again. Can we have an agreement on trade, do you think, between the U.S. and China if it still looks as it looks in Hong Kong?
Well, I mean, certainly, Connell, I think that's complicated issues for sure between the U.S. and China is how they've handled Hong Kong so far. And I mean, gosh, guys, I just look at the behavior of China over the last 6 months, 12 months, certainly 18 months. It doesn't feel to me like they want to do a deal. You know, they've walked away from agreements that they've made. They've canceled meetings. They've changed their tone at the meetings. They've sent underlings instead of the real deputies, you know, with respect to getting the real deal done. So to me, it just seems like this is a long-term game for them that they're going to keep playing until they can maybe outlast Trump or say, get us to fold, which we're not going to do.
Brings an interesting point up, Dion. If Scott's right and China doesn't necessarily, quote unquote, want to do a deal, what about the U.S. With the trial balloon, as it appears, was floated on Friday about limiting investment or banning Chinese companies from listing here? Does the U.S. really want to get a deal done in the short term? How do you think the administration views it?
Well, I mean, Trump could really use a deal. A deal would be great for him. Certainly would bolster his deal making or his reputation as a deal maker, and it would certainly calm the markets down. I do think, though, that there are right now black clouds kind of hanging over both sides. You've got these images that you see on your screen there coming from Hong Kong. That's a big problem for Xi Jinping, president of China. President Trump now has this impeachment ordeal hanging over his head, and that's really what the market's worried about. The market just wants these tariffs to stop. They want the increasing tensions to stop. They want things to get evened out, as we saw with the Chicago PMI today. This stuff is having a real impact on the U.S. economy. We're starting to see real impacts, particularly in the heartland in the U.S., that area that Chicago covers, those Midwestern states where we get manufacturing and trade and all that. We're starting to see that have an effect. And so a deal would really help ease some of these tensions and get things back on track, and that's what the market wants to see.
All right, we'll see what happens later this month with the next round of talks. Dion and Scott, good stuff as always. Thanks.